The sinking of the Titanic between April 14th and 15th, 1912, remains the most famous shipwreck in history and has become a cultural myth filled with legends. A total of 1,357 men, 110 women, and 56 children lost their lives. Meanwhile, 323 men, 324 women, and 56 children survived, leaving a final death toll of 1,523 and 703 survivors. Everyday life, with its divisions between the upper, middle, and lower classes, was mirrored in the ship's passenger layout, and those differences persisted even in death. An incredible 97% of first-class women survived, compared to 49% of third-class women. Among the men, 32% of those in first class made it out alive, while only 8% of second-class men and 13% of third-class men survived. As with any great tragedy, the sinking of the Titanic gave rise to incredible acts of heroism, selflessness, and cowardice, as well as to unbelievable coincidences that have survived in stories more than a century later. Today, we're diving deep into the dramatic events of the Titanic by sharing the stories of 20 survivors. These accounts reveal acts of courage, acts of selfishness, and all the raw humanity that comes to light in life's most critical moments. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Frederick Fleet was the lookout who first spotted the infamous iceberg and raised the alarm. That night, with no moon and poor visibility, the two lookouts on duty did not have binoculars, essential equipment that could have helped detect the iceberg sooner. Fleet later helped man Lifeboat 6, which was one of the first to be lowered into the water. Although he survived the disaster, Fleet struggled deeply with depression and guilt. He left the White Star Line just 4 months after the sinking. Years later, following the death of his wife and losing his home, Fleet tragically ended his life at the age of 77. The survival of Masabumi Hosono, the only Japanese passenger aboard the Titanic, became a source of humiliation for him in a society as governed by honor as Japan. Hosono, a 41-year-old government official, was condemned by his own government, the press, and the Japanese public for surviving the disaster under what many considered disgraceful circumstances. As the number of lifeboats dwindled, Hosono became increasingly nervous. When there was an announcement from Lifeboat 10 shouting, "Space for 2 more," another man jumped aboard. Hosono followed suit, taking advantage of the chaos as the sailors were distracted. His survival, while fortunate, led to him being publicly shamed upon his return to Japan. Cosmo Duff-Gordon, a British aristocrat, became infamous for his involvement in the Titanic disaster. He had previously gained recognition by winning the silver medal in the 1906 Olympic fencing competition, although this intercalated Olympic Games is not recognized by the International Olympic Committee. In 1900, he married the famous London designer Lucy Christiana, better known as Madame Lucielle. However, his reputation crumbled when he was accused of bribing the crew of Lifeboat No. 1, saving himself, his wife, and his secretary. He admitted to giving money, but insisted it was not a bribe, but rather a charitable donation. Despite his explanation, he became known as the coward of the Titanic. Lucy Noel Leslie, a popular figure in British aristocracy, exhibited remarkable bravery during the sinking of the Titanic. She boarded Lifeboat No. 8, along with her maid, helping sailor Thomas Jones to steer the boat, while comforting those who were in distress and consoling those who had left family members behind. She steered and rowed the boat throughout the night, until the passengers were rescued early the next morning. As a token of recognition, the sailor gave her the lifeboat's identification plaque. Although she was overwhelmed by her newfound status as a heroine, she continued her community work until her death in 1956 at the age of 77. In 1907, Joseph Bruce Ismay dined with William Perry, his counterpart at Harland and Wolff Shipyard, to order the construction of the largest, fastest, and most luxurious transatlantic liner. However, after the Titanic collided with the iceberg, he was told by naval engineer Thomas Andrews that the ship was doomed. Ismay returned to his cabin, and soon after he made his way to the lifeboat deck, where he boarded a lifeboat without permission. No one stopped him. After being rescued by the RMS Carpathia, he was isolated in the infirmary to avoid the hostility of the surviving passengers. He was harshly criticized on both sides of the Atlantic for having survived, while many women and children remained on board. Ismay resigned from his position as president of the White Star Line in 1913, and he died in 1937, his life forever marked by the tragedy. The unsinkable Molly Brown inspired the cinematic character of the rich and outspoken woman who lent Leonardo DiCaprio's character the tuxedo of her son and taught him proper etiquette at the dinner table in the movie Titanic. Margaret Brown, however, came from humble origins and became wealthy when her husband discovered a gold mine in Colorado. She took charge of lifeboat number 6 after the sailor in charge, Robert, refused to return to rescue passengers in the water. Brown also played a key role in organizing the Survivors Committee and was a staunch advocate for women's rights, cementing her legacy as a strong, independent woman of her time. Colonel Archibald Gracie IV survived the Titanic disaster, but lived less than 8 months afterward. However, he had enough time to write the book, The Truth About the Titanic, which continues to be published today. On board the ill-fated ship, Gracie entertained his first-class companions with tales from the American Civil War, in which his father had participated. He also assisted with the lifeboat launches, lending his pocketknife to Officer Charles Lightoller to help free 4 collapsible lifeboats. As the ship sank, Gracie was thrown into the sea just moments before the Titanic disappeared beneath the waves. Miraculously, he managed to grab hold of one of the collapsible lifeboats he had helped release, and the passengers aboard were eventually rescued by a standard lifeboat that had been alerted by a whistle. Gracie passed away on December 4, 1912, at the age of 53, and several survivors attended his funeral. When Argentine stewardess Violet Jessup, daughter of Irish immigrants, survived the Titanic disaster, she was no stranger to maritime accidents. She had previously been aboard the RMS Olympic when it collided with the British warship HMS Hawke in 1911. Her brushes with disaster didn't end with the Titanic. Violet also survived the sinking of the Britannic in 1916. During the Titanic's evacuation, she helped Spanish-speaking passengers board the lifeboats. Later, aboard lifeboat number 16, she continued assisting others. She remained with the White Star Line, and, 4 years later, found herself on the Britannic when it struck a mine in the Aegean Sea and sank. Remarkably, she survived yet again. Her third major maritime disaster. Violet Jessup lived a long life, passing away in 1971 at the age of 83 after 42 years of service at sea. Elite tennis player Richard Norris Williams was traveling on the Titanic with his father, Edwin, when he broke down a door to free a trapped passenger. For doing so, he was reprimanded by a crew member and even threatened with charges for property destruction. Williams survived the sinking after spending 6 freezing hours in the icy water, though tragically, his father did not. His legs were so badly damaged by the cold that doctors recommended amputation. Refusing to give up, the 21-year-old fought to recover and went on to win the U.S. Open in 1914 and again in 1916, becoming a true symbol of resilience. Edith Rosenbaum was the passenger who lost the most luggage during the Titanic disaster. She boarded the ship with so many suitcases that she had to rent an extra cabin just to store her 19 pieces of luggage. While in Cherbourg, she tried to insure her belongings but was advised not to waste her money. After all, the Titanic was considered unsinkable. When the evacuation began, she boarded a lifeboat carrying a musical toy that played the song La Sorella, which she used to calm and entertain the frightened children. Later, she filed one of the most famous claims against the White Star Line for the loss of her luggage. After the tragedy, Edith continued her career as a fashion stylist and correspondent, eventually passing away in London in 1975 at the age of 95. Alice Cleaver boarded the Titanic as the nanny for Trevor Allison, the one-year-old son of a wealthy Canadian family. She stayed with the baby in a first-class cabin, and when disaster struck, she grabbed Trevor and boarded a lifeboat, without notifying the family or anyone else. The reasons for her actions remain unclear, as she never spoke publicly about the incident. However, some blamed her for the deaths of Trevor's mother and sister, who refused to leave the ship without knowing the baby's whereabouts. Alice Cleaver died in 1984, taking her secrets with her to the grave. Before surviving the sinking of the Titanic, American actress Dorothy Gibson was already considered the world's first movie star, frequently appearing on the covers of Cosmopolitan, Ladies' Home Journal, and other popular magazines. The tragedy only boosted her fame when she starred as herself in Saved from the Titanic, one of the first films to feature color sequences. It was shot in less than 2 weeks and released just a month after the disaster. Dorothy and her mother had been returning from a 6-week vacation in Italy and boarded the Titanic. They escaped by getting onto the very first lifeboat launched. Dorothy hadn't even finished disembarking in New York when she was approached to make the movie. Charles Joughin, the Titanic's chief baker, reacted quickly after the ship struck the iceberg. He ordered his 13 assistants to load food and water onto the lifeboats, then returned to his cabin for a few drinks to steady his nerves. After that, he went back to the deck to help launch the lifeboats, and even threw about 50 deck chairs overboard to help people stay afloat. Joughin ended up in the freezing Atlantic when the ship finally broke apart, later describing it as feeling like falling down an elevator shaft. He was the last survivor to leave the Titanic. Thanks to the alcohol in his system, which slightly slowed the effects of hypothermia, he managed to survive in the icy waters until he was rescued by a lifeboat. Jack Thayer was the survivor who insisted that the Titanic had split in two before sinking. He supported his claim with detailed sketches and written accounts. At the time, many dismissed his version of events, but his testimony was finally proven right. 73 years later, when the wreck of the Titanic was discovered in 1985, Jack, just 17 years old at the time, was traveling with his parents. He survived by jumping into the freezing ocean from a first-class railing near the ship's gymnasium. His mother managed to secure a spot on a lifeboat, but sadly, his father did not survive. After spending time in the water, Jack was pulled into a lifeboat and eventually rescued by the RMS Carpathia. Though he survived the Titanic, tragedy struck again later in life. In 1945, following years of deep depression after losing his son Edward in World War II, Jack Thayer took his own life. Madeline Astor married John Jacob Astor IV in 1911, a man 29 years her senior and one of the wealthiest Americans of the era. The couple set off on a luxurious honeymoon to Europe, even visiting Egypt, before booking first-class tickets for their return trip on the ill-fated Titanic. They weren't alone. Traveling with them were a maid, a valet, and a nurse, as Madeline was pregnant at the time. When disaster struck, Madeline and the other women were ushered into a lifeboat, while her husband, John Astor, and his valet perished. John's body was later recovered from the Atlantic. In 1916, Madeline gave up the vast fortune left to her by her late husband in order to remarry, this time to another millionaire, William Dick. She would marry a third time before passing away in 1940. Among the survivors of the Titanic were two young brothers, Michel Marcel, 4 years old, and Edmund, just 2. They became famously known as the Titanic orphans until they were eventually reunited with their mother, who had not traveled on the ship. The boys were traveling with their father, Michel Navratil, who had taken them without their mother's consent during a custody dispute. Tragically, their father perished in the disaster. The two boys, second-class passengers, were found alone in a lifeboat, cared for by women who noticed they were without any adult guardian. Edmund passed away in 1953, while Michel re-emerged in the public eye during the 1980s when the Titanic wreck was discovered. Milvina Dean, the youngest passenger aboard the Titanic, was also the longest-living survivor of the tragedy. She passed away in 2009 at the age of 97. Born on February 2, 1912, she boarded the Titanic with her English family as third-class passengers on April 10th. Along with her mother and nearly 4-year-old brother, she boarded lifeboat number 10, leaving behind her father, who perished in the sinking. They were among the first third-class passengers to get into a lifeboat. Milvina never married or had children, and her retirement home expenses in her later years were paid for by a fund contributed to by Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, and James Cameron. Eva Miriam Hart was 7 years old when she boarded the Titanic with her mother Esther and father Benjamin. The family was traveling in second class, seeking the American dream, not in the US, but in Canada, where Benjamin, a carpenter, had a friend who spoke of the country's prosperity. Eva and her mother were able to board a lifeboat, while her father was claimed by the sea. After the tragedy, Eva suffered from recurring nightmares, which she only managed to confront at the age of 23 when she locked herself in a cabin for 4 days to face her demons. Eva passed away in 1996 at the age of 91. Charles Lightoller was the highest-ranking officer to survive the night of April 14th. After handing over the bridge watch to First Officer William Murdoch, he retired to his cabin, already in his pajamas, when he felt the collision. He directed the lifeboat launch operations, consistently enforcing the "women and children first" rule. When there were no other options left, Lightoller jumped into the water and clung to a collapsible lifeboat, along with other passengers until they were rescued. He later had a distinguished career in the Royal Navy during World War I and passed away in 1952 at the age of 78. Helen Churchill Candy was a pioneering feminist, publishing the bestseller How Women May Earn a Living in 1900, which highlighted opportunities for women to support themselves. She was also one of the early professionals in interior decoration, counting among her clients President Theodore Roosevelt and Secretary of State Henry L. Stimson. When the Titanic disaster struck, Candy broke her ankle while boarding lifeboat number 6 but managed to survive. She went on to serve as a volunteer nurse during World War I, continuing to travel and write. She passed away in 1949 at the age of 90. Which of these stories has touched you the most, left you shocked, or made you question what really happened that night? Each of these tales reminds us of the Titanic tragedy, but also of the courage, tough decisions, and controversies that marked the survivors. We hope this video has given you a fresh perspective on what those aboard went through. If you have anything to add or want to share your thoughts on these stories, feel free to leave a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends and family, so they can also learn about the Titanic survivors' stories. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.